Политик. Сказал, как обрезал.
Elizabeth Berney, Esquire, National Director of Research and Special Program, Zionist Organization of America. I'm very happy to have you on board with us. Welcome on board in Boutique Politic. Thank you very much for participating and giving you.
Thank you so much, Kirill. Thank you very much.
One of big rabbis in Eretz Israel once said that some people live in Eretz Israel in Israel and they are constantly thinking about money issues, about business abroad. They not living in Eretz Israel. And some people in diaspora, they living in diaspora, but all the thoughts and whatever they're thinking and doing, it's about Eretz Israel. So they living in Eretz Israel. So yesterday, a friend of mine sent me it's a Pesach right now, Chag Sameach, Madim L'Simcha, Happy Passover.
Chag Sameach.
And I saw a link from funeral yesterday of two girls that were killed in Jordan Valley, Mia and Rina, and today the mother passed away. And I was hearing the person, the father of the girls, he was talking about them, and the guy, I actually davened next to him in Zayit Ra'anan and Efrat when I was staying in Efrat. And that was a thing that he sent it to me, and since then, all day, and yesterday and today, is all in tears. And all I can think about only in that last wave of terror that's happening, and it started right before Pesach with all violence and everything. Considering all above said, can I ask you, can we start with what I want to ask you? Netanyahu invited Lapid last week for security briefing. And when Lapid left, he said right away, not that we are behind, like every time there's an issue in Israel, there's no opposition, there's no government, everybody, no coalition, no opposition, everybody going together to stand in united front against that threat. And Lapid behaved differently. He said, I came worried and I came out even more worried that government is not proper government, they cannot do stuff, they jeopardize our country. How can we, from our Jewish point of view, describe that such a behavior?
It's totally inappropriate. I mean, when you're attacked by terrorists and when people are killed, you have to band together and fight them. I mean, this group, which you may have heard of, so-called Movement for Quality Government. This is the movement that is behind the protests, organized the protests, and is being funded by the U.S. State Department. One of the other protests that they organized was when Hamas was shooting during May of 2021, when over 10 days they shot 4,600 rockets at Israel. And what the so-called Movement for Quality Government did was they protested Netanyahu during the time when Hamas is shooting rockets. They protested Netanyahu for trying to fight back and trying to stop this. I mean, this is it's virtually traitorous. This is not the way.
Whatever they're doing, don't you think it's like coup d'etat? They're trying to overturn election results and they're trying to prevent government from functioning in any possible way. And it's not like Netanyahu behaved when he was a leader in the opposition, when they were in government. You can criticize the government, depends when and what you are saying. And they're using protest just to get new elections as soon as possible, right?
Right. To bring down this government, because it's a total lie. These protests where they're screaming no democracy, they're screaming that the elected government is fascist. I mean, these are total lies. The judicial reform, which we were planning to speak about today, actually would make democracy, improve democracy in Israel. Because you wouldn't have an autocratic court which puts itself above the elected officials and which is answerable to nobody. There's no checks and balances now. So, the only explanation for it is that they're trying to bring down this government.
Okay. But people who are criticizing the reform, and there are a lot of people even on the right side who are saying that reform needs fine-tuning. There's certain things that should be addressed. For example, in Israel there's no constitution, so you have only in reality you don't have three separation of powers in Israel. Also, you have executive branch, and you have judicial branch, because legislative branch is the same as the majority in Knesset decide what majority is a government. Coalition is a government. You know the problem from beginning that there's no constitution. So when you have only two branches of power and the executive branch is completely controlled by coalition, and I mean legislative branch is completely controlled by coalition, because anyway it's gonna come to voting in Knesset, and if you have like more than 60, you can pass any law, as we can see, law of Daly.
I mean, I think I don't think that's true. I think you still have three branches because the coalition. I mean, the coalitions are fraying all the time, and the executive doesn't have absolute power. I mean, especially when you have these small coalitions, 61, even 64 people. If somebody doesn't like what you're doing, they threaten to leave the coalition. So you really do have a strong legislature too. And I agree that there's a problem about the Constitution, but the basic laws have been a substitute for the Constitution, and they're supposed to have the power of a Constitution. Of course, the Supreme Court doesn't follow them. The real problem is the autocracy of the judiciary, which doesn't even follow the basic laws that are passed by the legislature, which is the essence of democracy is government of the people, by the people, for the people, and the legislature is the government that was elected by the people. The judges are appointing themselves. They are not answerable to the people. In the United States, what we have is the president, who is an elected official, appoints the Supreme Court judges and the federal judges. The Senate, and those are other elected officials, confirms them. In many localities, I actually ran for judge where I live, for district court judge. In many localities, the people actually directly vote for the judge, but you don't have this in Israel. In Israel, you have this committee, and the committee is dominated by the judges and by lawyers who've practiced before the judges and are beholden to the judges, and they are the ones who keep selecting themselves. And this is definitely not democracy. And to have, the reform would have made it a little bit more like the American system, the American democratic system, where you have democracy, where you have the people having a say in the judges. I should also mention that under the American constitutional system, Congress has the power to impeach judges, but the people in Israel don't have the power to impeach judges who aren't following the law. And there's so many examples, and we've written about that. The ZOA's written about this a lot. There are many examples of the Israeli Supreme Court just violating the law, and one of the most egregious recent ones was what happened when Yair Lapid decided pretty much on his own, that he wanted to give away 300 miles of maritime territory, Israel's maritime territory, to Hezbollah-controlled Lebanon. Okay, and basically Hezbollah is getting 100%. Israel is getting nothing from this deal. It's not even a deal directly with Lebanon. There was a separate deal between the U.S. and Israel, and a separate deal between the U.S. and Lebanon, because Hezbollah and Lebanon want to make it absolutely clear that they're not making any kind of deals. They don't recognize Israel, and that this is not any kind of peace deal. It gives nothing to Israel. And the Supreme Court violated the law because there's a basic law which has constitutional effect. One of the basic laws of Israel is that if you give away territory, that you can't give away territory unless you have a supermajority in the Knesset voting for it. That's 80 people. Or you have a majority, plus you have a referendum by the entire Jewish people, because this is the Jewish people's land, and the Supreme Court refused to uphold the law.
Liz, I'm sorry for interrupting, but we're talking about disputed maritime borders. It's not land; it's disputed maritime borders. Right. It's a line in the Mediterranean Sea. It's not like established territory that you have to take a referendum for. It's No. Some of this is absolutely established maritime territory of Israel that it gave up. At least part of it is definitely maritime territory of Israel, and Israel had filed the proper papers to make this its territory for years. And yes, it was disputed because Hezbollah wanted this territory for itself. When Israel discovered gas fields there. So it became disputed, but for many years it was never disputed. Okay. And probably that I didn't follow properly. Then can we take that narrative at a little different angle? Like, imagine that Hezbollah always, Israeli intelligence assessment always been that Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah is always choosing between Iranian interests, because he is a Shia ruling party of Lebanon. He's a leader of that. And essentially in the possible military confrontation with Iran, Israeli military confrontation with Iran, possible in the future, which is possible in the future, he's supposed to take a position. And he understands, according to that military, that academia experts, that if he's taken position for Iran and started to shell Israel, for example, that's going to be suicide for Lebanon, for Hezbollah, and he's a Lebanon citizen, and he's a citizen of Lebanon, and he is a patriot of his country. So in academia, it was always like, you know what, it's not like done deal that he's going to engage himself again in war with Israel, because this time it's not like 2006, Israel is prepared, and that war is going to be last for him, last for Hezbollah, and probably last for Lebanon as a country. So when you give him an incentive to have peace with Israel, and when he make money, and out of that deal, all Lebanon, not only Hezbollah, but Lebanon and state budget of Lebanon going to make money. That deal will allow investors like Total, like French people, French companies, come in and start to drill and take that natural gas. And everybody gonna win from that deal. By the way, Israel also gonna win from that deal, because some proceeds going to Israel according to what Lapid was presenting at the time of signing the deal. We'll discuss the details. I mean, it was presented this way, that it's a win-win for everyone. But everybody got to go for a compromise here. So don't you think that kind of a benefit, that Hezbollah and Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah personally, and Lebanon as a country, when they benefit from that kind of deal, it's more incentive to keep at least status quo with Israel, not to engage himself in military confrontation?
No, I look at it exactly the opposite way. And incidentally, as far as Israel benefiting at all, the former ambassador to Israel, David Freeman, said, specifically said under the deal, they were trying to work out a deal, like a 50-50 deal. And he said under the deal that Lapid agreed to, it was 100% for Hezbollah and 0% for Israel. And he was, shocked at that how terrible the deal was for Israel. When you enrich terrorists, when you give terrorists more money, they have more money with which to attack Israel. Nasrallah, some people like to think that terrorists, the Shia terrorist is rational and thinks rationally the way that we do. No, they're ideologues, and their goal is to wipe out Israel, even if it costs them. The Iranian mullahs are the same way. So we can't import our sense of decency and our ideas about how we would act in a similar situation to how somebody who is an ideologue bent on Israel's destruction would act. And you see it every time that money goes into the hands of terrorists. There's more terror. Iran has stepped up its terror ever since money has poured into it, and since you no longer have the maximum sanctions. Since Biden has, as soon as Biden took office, he resumed funding the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, and then you had in May 2021, you had these massive attacks on Israel.
Okay, can I intervene right here? Because what you're saying is understood, because that's terrorist organizations. Now we have a Daniel Byman theory, who is an expert professor and expert in academia on terrorist movements and stuff. And his theory is like that. And we have confirmation of his theory in two places actually today. We can talk about that. Well, as long as we're talking about terrorist organization, just a terrorist organization, you're absolutely right. There's no question about rationality, decency, and stuff like that. And they're going to use and utilize any money they got into continuation and development of terrorist activities. That is a given. We don't even discuss that. That's an axiom. Now, when we talk about terrorist organization, or for us, it's in our narrative, it's terrorist organization. In their narrative, it's freedom fighters. So, when that minority force becoming a ruling power, then priorities of that structure changing. And now, when they are responsible for millions of people under their rule, they behave differently. In Hamas, we see that dynamic since they are ruling, and they see that popular sentiment in Gaza Strip, for example, is not like used to be, and now they're saying, no, we're not going to participate in this kind of activities. We're not going, directly at least, we're not going to participate in this kind of activities. Why? Because they need to run day-to-day affair of 2 million Arabs living in Gaza right now. And they know that if they're participating in Israel response, everything that Qatar has given them going to go to waste. Everything that everybody else, Turkey given them, is going to waste. And they cannot run sewer, sanitation, they cannot run electricity, anything they cannot run, and they will be failing as a government, and they are government. The same in partially true with Hezbollah today. They are ruling power of Lebanon. Why don't you think they will utilize whatever they get for future of Lebanon?
No, I mean, Iran is also the Iranian mullahs, they're also controlling a government. Hamas is controlling a government, and they haven't stopped with their terror activities. I mean, Hamas has been in power since 2007, and they've started war after war. The money that they get, they take and they use it for building rockets and for building terror tunnels. They don't use it to benefit their people. They don't care about benefiting their people. I remember reading that something like they had little children digging terror tunnels because they were small and they could, fit into the openings. And then after they finished digging the tunnels, they killed them all so that nobody would know where the terror tunnels were. They put the terror tunnels under schools. They don't care. They don't care about their people. And then meanwhile, they also use the money, incidentally, to enrich themselves. You have the Hamas. The Hamas officials, they and their children all have these million-dollar villas in Gaza. But as far as caring about the people, they don't care about the people. Why do you think you have the uprising in Iran? Because the people have been sick of how this government's been treating it, and that's a government. So you can't say that once terrorists control the government, they're suddenly going to be wonderful, because they're not.
Wonderful,
they're hard.
Better. Not wonderful.
It gives them more power. It gives them more power.
Okay. I got your point. Understood. We can agree to disagree. But the thing is, it's a big thing. We see sometimes in Hamas, we see reduction of violence from their side, at least. But now we see different phenomena in Palestinian Authority. We see different groups that establish themselves. We see worsening situation with terrorism right now in Israel. What do you think should be done right now if we're talking about security of State of Israel?
Okay, I first of all, let me just say, I don't see Hamas as reducing anything. And in fact, they're in addition to sending rockets over to Israel, they're involved in many of the terror attacks in Judea and Samaria and elsewhere. They have never reduced their. I mean, there'll times where they'll regroup. Strategically, they'll get hit. A lot of their rockets. Israel will wipe out a lot of their rockets, and so then they'll call a truce. But they have never changed. They have never changed their tune. They've never changed their their basic documents, which call for the murder of every single Jew in the world, not just the Jews in Israel. These are ideologues, hateful ideologues who are bent on destruction. And I'm sorry, what was the other question?
The other question was that terrorist activities all over Judea and Samaria is increasing. And in this particular situation, what would you think would be right for Netanyahu government to do in this particular situation?
In this particular situation? Several things. I mean, you're talking about funding. One thing is to insist that the U.S. stop the funding to the Palestinians, because that funding just frees up more money for these so-called martyr payments. The Palestinian Authority pays terrorists to murder Jews, and they pay them pensions that are 5 times the average salary of regular Palestinian Arab worker, and they're constantly inciting. And I think Israel has to take a strong stand with the United States on that. And I would even send the ambassador home and say, until you stop paying money to the Palestinians so that they can take that money or save that money. So a lot of it's indirect now, but the Palestinian Authority ends up saving money and providing government services. Until they stop stop sending money that indirectly will help the Palestinian Authority pay people to kill us, you don't belong here. That's it. This is one of the things that just has to stop, and the constant incitement. You'll have a lot less terror if people aren't getting paid to be terrorists, and then Israel has to take stronger actions, whether it's, destroying the terrorist homes, and one of the reasons I need the judicial reform is because the Israeli Supreme Court is constantly interfering with the way that Israel needs to react to stop this horrible terror. Do you realize that according to the Israeli government figures on terrorist attacks, and this is before the most recent attacks that you're talking about, Israel was suffered from 9 significant terror attacks every single day. I added it up, and that's not including the general rock throwing and Molotov cocktail throwing that goes on all the time. These are serious terror attacks. You have to have, actually have to have more security forces. You have to have more building. Places like E1, the E1 corridor between Jerusalem and Ma'ale Adumim, that has to be built up with Jewish communities, which the Biden administration twisted Israel's arm not to go forward with. But if you have those communities, it's harder for the Palestinian the Palestinian terrorists to operate, because you can implant, your armed forces within the existing towns, and they can operate much more easily. You have to build more. A lot of the problem is the Biden administration constantly siding with the terrorists. And I don't know if you heard about this latest plan, but the Biden administration now came out with a plan that they're going to train 5,000 commandos, Palestinian Arab commandos in Jordan, in the latest commando techniques. And these commandos are supposed to go against the terrorists. Yeah, right.
That was Obama. And Obama was... Yeah, and that one was the same program. In my school in NYU, I had a colonel who trained them. He came as a guest speaker in my Middle East class. So he was coming and telling us how they do it, and I asked them all the questions. Before that, he was training Iraqi commanders, that guy. I don't remember his name even. It was 2011, 2012. So, but it was happening under Obama. Don't you think that administration is the same as Obama administration nowadays?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Obama's in the background. And the Biden administration is full of Obama people. The same people that that Obama hired in his cabinet and in all of his top positions. We have at the ZOA, we have a website or a web page called Biden Appointments Watch, which goes into the background of the various people who he's appointed into top positions, and many of them are Obama holdovers. Yeah, but the current commando training is probably even worse than the Obama plan. A lot of it has, been Obama plans on steroids. And of course, all this training is going to be not going to be used against, fellow Palestinian Arab terrorists. It's going to be used against Israelis, because that's how it's been in the past. So, Israel has to put its foot down. The U.S. can't do this. There's, so there's so many things that Israel can do, and we have to also. American Jews should be putting their foot down about this. American Jews, ZOA is constantly speaking about these issues and criticizing the terrible programs that the Biden administration is coming out with, and its pressures on Israel, and it's giving money to the Palestinians and also giving money to UNRWA. It's something like $600 million has gone to UNRWA, which is basically employs all the Hamas terrorists, and hides rockets and in its schools for Hamas and in its facilities for Hamas. Other organizations need to join with us in stopping this. This is our tax dollars. Our U.S. tax dollars are going to help foment terror.
What can be in practice? No problem. In practice, what can American Jews do to stop interfering by American officials in Israeli internal affairs? Because it's a serious question. We know that
It's an extremely serious question, and I think more of them have to join with groups like ZOA to complain about what the Biden administration is doing. I wish that every single organization would be complaining about this, but instead you have a lot of left-wing organizations that are siding with the Obama administration. We're having problems with the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations right now. That's a group it's an umbrella group of 51 or 52 American organizations, and they are supposed to check with the individual organizations. They're supposed to discuss with the member organizations their positions before they make a policy. But instead, they've been siding with the Biden administration on all kinds of issues without even checking with us and without checking with the other groups that are members. And they're doing it in the name. It's outrageous. They're doing this in the name of the 52 organizations, and we certainly don't agree with the Biden administration's policies. I mean, you unfortunately have a lot of left-wing Jews that are on the wrong side of this and are doing real harm to Israel and not understanding that we need to have a united front against the funding of the Palestinians, against the funding of UNRWA, against all the Biden administration's pressures on Israel, against the pressures not to build Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, which are important for Israel's strategic, in addition to Israel having the absolute right to do this, are very important for Israel's strategic depth. It's a huge problem, but we continue to talk and we continue to try to push these, the correct positions.
Right. The thing is, we have a lot of structures. It's you have J Street right now in America, who's doing the job, and they're totally supporting. I think they're totally supporting whatever Biden administration is doing, and they totally supporting all Democratic administration since their inception. They were pro. Interfering, they were putting pressure on Israel. It's not news. The thing is, what in reality can be done? What kind of mechanism, what kind of lobby pressure can be put on Biden administration? Because in the end of the day, it's all questions are decided in phone calls between Blinken and Cohen, between Blinken and Netanyahu. Netanyahu didn't get invited even to White House after election, after last election. Right. I think that is it's an insult. And Biden has just recently announced that he's going to run for another term. So I think the Jewish structures and Jewish organizations are supposed to put pressure right away on him and tell him, listen, we're not going to vote for you. We're not going to encourage our members to vote for you and for Democratic Party on next elections. But that should be done, as you're rightfully saying, it should be done like everyone should do it. We should not be dividing between left and right. We should understand that in this particular case, we have to be together. But problem of unity, unfortunately, that's the most important problem right now we have. Right after commercial break, we come to discuss more about judicial reform and how can we overcome that divide that is going right by judicial reform. Stay with us. Оставайтесь с нами, друзья.
Бутик-политик. Сказал, как обрезал.
Друзья, напоминаю, у нас в гостях Elizabeth Berney, Esquire, National Director of Research and Special Projects, Zionist Organization of America, Liz. Welcome back.
Welcome, thank you.
In that discussion that right now is going on between coalition and opposition in Bougie Herzog residence, President of Israel residence, some things are very important things are raised, like questions like who can cancel decision, how Knesset can overcome veto of Supreme Court, for example. And according to initial variants of the reform, it was like simple majority. Do you think that simple majority is enough to overturn Supreme Court decision?
I think that's one of the things that maybe can be negotiated a little bit. What the number of Knesset members, although simple majority is actually not easy to obtain in Israel. But I think that's one of the areas that if people sat down and discussed, that they might come to a different compromise. I don't know that simple majority is necessarily the right number, but the left has refused to even sit down for the most part. And by the way, I wanted to thank you very much for having this discussion. Because there's been sort of a concerted effort to cut. And sometimes we agree on things, sometimes we disagree on things, but it's important to have these discussions because there has been a concerted effort on the left to shut down rational discussion and reasonable discussion, like we're having. As you know, Netanyahu was subjected to a gag order, and there were left-wing groups that sent around a letter saying that nobody should invite the people who were, to their synagogues, to speak at their synagogues, who were proposing the judicial reforms, that they shouldn't invite Bezalel Smotrich and the head of the Constitution Committee, Simcha Rotman, at the Conference of Presidents when they went to Israel didn't invite them. So, in order to, people have to hear the other side, and unfortunately also the Israeli media, most of it doesn't speak about the other side. So
but if media
great.
doesn't speak of another side, the point of view, then what's the point of existence of that media? I mean, the point of existence is to present all point of views. Otherwise, there's no point of it. There's no sense.
I totally agree. So it's very important to have these discussions, and I want to thank you for having this on your show.
No, thank you for agreeing to talk about that, because it's a serious issue. The issue is very serious.
It's my pleasure. I mean, we've been talking about it everywhere we can. The head of ZOA, Morton Klein, has been on Newsmax and other media. He's been quoted in the Times. We've been trying to get out to all the media in every place that we can, and written articles in the Jerusalem Post and everywhere we can about the importance of the judicial reform for Israeli democracy. I wanted to mention, if I could, a couple of the other really horrible cases that this Israeli Supreme Court has decided, some of which have cost lives. There was a case where the IDF planned to raise some buildings that that were along a road. They're abandoned buildings that terrorists were using to attack Israelis who were passing by on the nearby road. And the army planned to pay compensation to the absentee building owners. This is something that the U.S. would do, eminent domain. If there's a building that needs to be taken over, we do this all the time, routinely. And the left-wing organizations got involved, and as they always do in the lawfare. I should mention that the Israeli Supreme Court hears 10,000 cases a year, and it only takes, there are 15 people on the court. They have panels of 3 judges, and it only takes 2 judges to overturn an action of the Israeli government. And they take on any kind of case. In the United States, the Supreme Court can only hear cases that went all the way through the system. They went to the district court, and then went to the appeals court, and then they go up to the Supreme Court, where there's an actual controversy, where that the case is actually brought by the parties who have standing, who have some kind of injury. In Israel, they hear anything. There are no standing requirements, no justiciability. The U.S. Supreme Court won't hear political questions. They're not going to question what the military does. Israeli Supreme Court they think they can decide everything.
What is interesting also is that sometimes for the decision they cite reasonability, not the law.
Right.
They say it's not reasonable. It's not reasonable. Right. But that is unacceptable.
Yeah, they don't follow the law. They don't follow the law. So, in this case where the Israel Defense Forces wanted to raise these buildings that the terrorists were using and pay compensation, the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. Again, it's not reasonable or whatever. And so this decision resulted in a terrible tragedy. Just shortly afterwards, Arab terrorists then used the buildings to slaughter a young pregnant woman. Her name was Hali Hatuel, who was driving along the road, and her 4 young daughters. Her daughters were ages 2 to 11 years old. This is a tragedy, and this is why people say that the Israeli Supreme Court has blood on its hands for cases like this. Another issue is that the court permitted these terror-supporting political parties who openly seek to violently overthrow Israel to run for the Knesset. And they were talking about some of the Arab parties who they openly, they sing, they go to their conventions and they sing these songs for blood, the bloody takeover of Israel. And the Knesset election has something called the Central Elections Committee, and the Central Elections Committee disqualified these parties because they violated Israel's basic law. It's Knesset 7A, and because the basic law bars parties and candidates that incite racism or support armed struggle by an enemy state or terrorist organization against Israel. Some of these Arab parties have also, some of the members of Knesset have even spied for Hezbollah. And the Supreme Court overturned that. They overturned the Knesset Central Elections Commission, and they violated Israel's basic law barring these racist parties. Okay, another example. Israel has a law against BDS, boycotts, divestment, and sanctions. If you're one of the people who is an activist who's supporting the BDS, who's a BDS activist, then you can't come into Israel. So there was a woman who was the head of the Students for Justice in Palestine, is a BDS group which torments the Jewish kids on the college campuses, and she was the head of the Students for Justice in Palestine chapter in her college. And a year and a half later, she decided she wants to go to Israel to study in Israel, and so Israel, the Israeli officials said, you can't come because of this 2017 law, you're barring the entry of BDS activists. This is a law passed by the Knesset. And the Supreme Court says, no, you have to let her in. And actually, Gilad Erdan was then the public security minister, and he said that, I'll quote from him, "The Supreme Court granted a great victory to BDS. The Supreme Court's decision has undermined the ability of the State of Israel to fight the boycott activists who harm us all." That's yet another example.
I'm so sorry, Liz. We have to come to an end.
I could go on and on.
I understand, but the thing is a broadcast time is limited. As next show is coming up. Thank you very much for participation. We're going to talk next time. I hope.
Thank you so much. I look forward to it, Kirill. Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you very much.
All the best.
Bye-bye.
Бутик Политик. Сказал, как обрезал.